Okay, so I think I'm going to end up having to do my theory that I've been working on for Amphibia in this format instead of the more time-consuming little cartoon avatar format like I had planned. Because, we're apparently at the mid-season break at this point, but I straight up don't trust this show not to still somehow drop lore within a week that ruins my theory. No, in all seriousness, I just feel like I owe you guys this theory. I've been talking about getting an Amphibia theory out to you guys for so long at this point. I need to get it done. What's even more annoying about this whole thing is this theory was originally just going to be basically everything that the king confirmed to us through that book that he showed the characters at the beginning of A Day at the Aquarium, which is just great that I used up so much of my time compiling literally the same information that the show just handed to us, also in a 30-second segment of television. I'm not salty about it at all. I'm sure you can tell. Thankfully, that stinking book did give us a lot more to talk about, which is why I'm not so mad that I can't make the theory. I'm not really mad, I'm just playing it up for the camera, right? But that's beside the point. Thankfully, it did give us a lot more to talk about. In fact, the Amphibia community, the Amphibia fandom, is absolutely fantastic and capable of things that I'm even not capable of, which isn't saying much, and has already, in fact, translated a bunch of the stuff that was in that book. There's a prophecy written on those pages, and it's already been translated, and this is one of the things I was talking about that completely wrecked my old theory, because I was going to theorize basically this exact same thing. But here's the theory for you guys. I'm going to read it out for you. And this is courtesy of an Anon over on my Tumblr, who I'm very, very appreciative of. I never would have been able to get this video out as fast as I did if not for them. So thank you very much. 3 stars burning bright come from beyond to expel the night. Should they fight or embrace the fall, their choice will determine all. And we don't know what the night is, we don't know what the fall is, not for sure anyway, but I have some ideas about those things. Also, additionally, we now know what each of the 3 gems represents. It's strength for Sasha's pinkish gem, heart for Anne's blue gem, and wit for Marcy's green gem, which perfectly lines up with what the show has been implying up to this point. Through not just the personalities of the 3 girls and the impact that they have on the people around them and the things that other people say about them, but just in terms of context clues, general context clues. Anne, her powers only activating when she's standing up for or fighting for justice for the people she cares about most, which embodies heart in terms of offensive power, right? I also at this point think that my initial theory about Amphibia, that this is a show that's trying to be a Western take on an isekai anime and another world anime, was spot on. As not only does this book confirm flat out that there are multiple worlds that are all tenuously connected together and that the music box is a portal between, at the very least, Amphibia and Earth. But the crew working on the show have flat out stated that the show was inspired by Magic Knight Rayearth, I believe is how you pronounce that, a show that I'm only just now starting to watch because I'm thinking there's got to be themes in there that were taken from it for Amphibia, which is an isekai anime. It's a straight up isekai anime about 3 girls who end up in another world and their choices end up saving it. Just premise-wise, that sounds very, very super, almost identical to the premise of Amphibia. I'm sure the specifics are quite different, which is why I'm getting into watching the show, but still, how interesting is that? It wasn't even just the book that gave us more stuff to think about, though. The episode that took place before that, the sleepover to end all sleepovers, gave us a lot to think about, too, that crypt underneath the castle where all of those chained up coffins are. There's been speculation about those things and about the creatures that came out of them. I can't remember what they're called. They have an actual name. But the creatures that came out of them, and I'm not going to go too deep into the speculation around those things because we just don't know. I'm gonna give one take in this video, but I'm not going to get too deep into it because we just don't know. Not a whole lot of that makes sense. But the creatures are interesting because they don't seem to follow any of the established laws of creatures in this reality. They aren't birds or insects or bird insects or insect birds or amphibians. Right? Like, the only truly magical creature we know of in this world is a mossman, which, incidentally, there was a mossman down there in, like, the foresty part of the underground basement area. I didn't even catch him my first or second time through because there was so much going on. But there was one of those down there, a creature that is not officially recognized by the government of this world. It's officially a cryptid. And the king has one in his basement, which already confirms that the guy is keeping things from his people, aside from just this secret crypt with monsters in it that he might have a genuine reason to keep the existence of from his people. Right? If you really wanted to be generous to the king, you could argue that his castle is built on top of that. So maybe he's protecting people from these things and hasn't told about them so as not to cause a panic. But the fact that he's keeping an entirely peaceful creature down there and lying about its existence proves that there's something more shady going on. But I do think my favorite theory for what these creatures are, because they don't seem to follow the rules of this reality, this particular plane of reality that is Amphibia. Like, even the Mossman, a magical creature, is entirely corporeal and still, looks like something. Some of these, I can't remember what they're called. I still can't remember what they're called. But some of these creatures are kind of jellyfish-like. Some of them are kind of slug-like. But above and beyond that, they don't really look like anything. They have weird numbers of eyes. They behave so strangely. Just in general. Like their bodies biologically behave so strangely. I think it stands to reason, and I like the theory, that they come from one of the other realities that can be traveled to from Amphibia. Because if you look in the book, there are lines which connect Amphibia to all the other worlds pictured on that page of worlds, but there's no lines between them, which seems to suggest that you have to travel from Amphibia to one of these other worlds. So to get from, like, Earth to the world on the left or something, you'd have to go through Amphibia. Also worth noting here on this page is that there is also no direct line between Earth and Amphibia, which means either the other worlds are easier to transport yourself to, you don't need an equivalent to the Calamity Box to do it, or else this book was written after the Calamity Box was sent to Earth, breaking the path between Amphibia and Earth by removing the Calamity Box from the equation. Just worth considering, because I do think that's what happened here. I do think somebody sent the Calamity Box to Earth in order to keep the amphibians from getting back to Earth. Possibly again, right? The most interesting thing in the basement, though, is the painting, which, again, this fandom is great. Someone actually reconstructed the painting as much as it is possible to reconstruct it as it exists. There's one figure in the painting whose face can't be reconstructed, and they are by far the most interesting of the three, which bums me the heck out, but I still have a lot to say about this. Okay, so let's break this down, right? The 3 stars from the prophecy are definitely the 3 girls, and if you don't believe me, for whatever reason, even though things that come in threes in this show definitely relate back to the 3 girls because they relate to the 3 stones, then look at this image of Polly's golden pail that she got in Hopping Mall, where 3 stars are being looked up to by the newts in the image as if they're worshiping them. And we now know, thanks to the book and thanks to dialogue from King Leviathan, that the stones, the 3 stones in the box, are recharged by visiting 3 temples. Temples being places of worship. That ties worship of the stars to worship of the stones. The stones are stars. And now the power of the stones is in the 3 girls. They are the 3 stars. Straight up, there is no arguing this point. I don't know why you would anyway, but just to prove it. It is proven now. Which means that the plot of this show overall is going to be that these 3 girls, by either allowing something to happen or taking a stand against it, will change the fate of this world and either save it from some night or allow that night to either come or continue. And oh, surprise, surprise, what have I been saying about this show for quite some time? Could it possibly be that there seems to be huge economic disparities between the classes in this world, and that things could be significantly better for them? Could that be the night that the prophecy is referring to? Is it perhaps suggesting that things are already bad enough that they need to change, or else they're going to get even worse sometime in the future? Because if that's the case, then I was right all along by speculating that the answer here might be to rise up against the king, to cause his fall. Like, the term fall in the prophecy definitely comes off as a negative thing. You fight or something falls. But I think in this case, the fight they're talking about is the fight against the dethroning of Andrias. And that in order for the night to end, or the night to be prevented, because it's possible the night is another thing that we'll talk about in a second, Andrias has to fall. That has to be allowed to happen. That's the choice that the three girls are going to have to make, and that initially at least, they're going to make different choices. Like, I definitely think Sasha's version of making him fall is going to be too much, and I definitely think Marcy is going to stand against that. That she is going to fight to keep the king from falling, and that it's going to have to be Anne who tempers the two of them and finds a better way. As for what the night could be, again, as I mentioned, it could be just the general relatively awful conditions that a lot of Andrias' subjects live in. Like, even the lower class people in his own city tend to have it very rough. The people outside have it even worse. But it's also possible that it's something else. For example, do you guys remember that toad-like robot thing? Anybody? Anybody remember that? What if that robot, and robots like it, exist to fill out a conquering army? What if Andrias' real intentions here are to get the music box for himself and use it to lead an army, possibly even an army of those robot things, now that the factory has been reactivated and he might have heard of its existence and know now what it does? It is possible that that's a thing. What if he plans to lead an army to Earth? He mentions in the beginning of A Day at the Aquarium that his ancestors were peaceful explorers, scientists even, or something along those lines. And the way he says it, and I mentioned this in my review, the way he says it definitely comes across like his ancestors were colonizers. And I think he wants to start colonizing again, but Earth is an advanced place now. Maybe it wasn't last time. Maybe the amphibians were more advanced then, and the night, or at the very least, the state of things up to this point, as Andrias has ruled, even if that's not the night, right? Amphibia's kind of stagnated. They haven't advanced much. In fact, they've regressed in some areas, like, hence why the factory wasn't running anymore. So Earth now isn't a place that you can so easily colonize. It would have to be conquered. And I think that could be what the Knight is referring to as well. That Andrias intends to waltz into Earth, conquer the place, and if he's successful, maybe go out and conquer other worlds as well, which would bring devastation to literally everyone, and that's a thing that will have to stop. But AJ, I'm sure you're asking, isn't this a little problematic? Wouldn't it be kind of shitty if the show ends on the message that these people had to come from outside to fix all the problems for this disparaged group, that they weren't able to rise up and do it for themselves? And yeah, I think it would be. So, I'm going to speculate about one more thing, and this is where speculation about the crypt comes in. I know that some of you guys disagree with me on this, and I could turn out to be wrong, of course, but I think the crypt is going to turn out to be a crypt for past rulers of Amphibia. And there's a reason I think that, because I think that painting that was destroyed to hide the fact that there used to be a triumvirate of rulers of Amphibia. That there used to be one newt, one frog, and one toad. Because if you look at the three figures in that painting. One of them is clearly Andreas. The other is a toad, though he looks more like a horned frog than a toad, but that's beside the point. It doesn't really matter. Because, like, yes, there is a horned toad, but it's actually kind of reptile. It's not an amphibian. But that could just be a stylistic choice to make him look more royal because of the horns, right? But there's also definitely a frog there. And he looks kind of interesting, doesn't he? Here's the image right here. Notice the color. Notice the size. Notice the general body shape. This frog is clearly related to Sprig and Polly. And this theory that I'm about to present to you guys even kind of explains some of the weird stuff about the Planter family. Like, if you recall, the Planters have books and archives on all kinds of weird shit. Stuff that you wouldn't expect a simple farm family to have. Especially not in a world that seems to suppress information the way that Andreas's kingdom seems to suppress information, or at least bend the truth as often as they possibly can in order to control people. Also, recall that we just recently learned about Sprig's mom. We were just recently told about her. Her existence was just recently mentioned, and she became, at least for a scene, central to the story. While that scene was great, and I'm glad it's there, I think there was an explicit purpose for it. Because I think we're going to find out that Sprig's mom was the last of that family, the last of that line of frog rulers. That she escaped to Wartwood and married into the Planter family in order to hide from Andreas and his court. That she brought with her all of these royal resources, all of this royal knowledge, and that's what the Planters have now. At the very least, I think if it wasn't explicitly Sprig's mom, then it was one of her ancestors, right? I can't think of another reason why Sprig would look the way he does relative to the character in that painting. In fact, looking at the painting again, the frog in the painting has what seems to be feminine hair. I think it's possible that the reason the face of that frog isn't there is because that's literally Sprig's mom. And despite him claiming he doesn't remember her well, the reason her face isn't there is because Sprig saw the painting, and if he had seen her face, he might have actually recognized her. Like, it's kind of a long shot still, because it doesn't seem like frogs would live that long, and Andreas is clearly younger here than he is now. But still, how interesting is that? Especially when there's also been a couple of interesting pieces of dialogue which specifically call out Sprig being different than the average frog.
Wow, I've never seen a frog your color before. Wow, I've never seen a frog your color before.
So I think whatever happens, assuming that the girls do in the end save Amphibia and possibly all the other worlds from that page in the book, which I do think is what's going to happen. This is still a kid's show, right? I think that in the end, Sprig is going to have to rise up too. I have, after all, mentioned the show's tendency to treat him as, at the least, a secondary protagonist after Anne. I think he's going to have to rise up and be installed as a new ruler of Amphibia who will enact the change long-term that needs to be made to improve things overall throughout the entire world. And I think that crypt, specifically, is down there to house the bodies of the other two royal families, the Frog royal family and the Toad royal family, and that those strange creatures were brought from another world to, over time, eat the remains and hide them. Like, that's super grim, and I don't think this show will ever explicitly confirm that, if that's the case. They'll just let context tell us, but I do think that's why they're there, and that's what they are. Which might even explain why the defense against the creatures, the two hallways of mirrors, were so half-assed. That the creatures were able to get out so easily, because they have so much food down there that there was no real reason for them to try to leave. I also think it's interesting, we know for a fact that the music box is called a calamity box, which means that something associated with the music box was also explicitly associated with a calamity in Amphibia's past. I think that whatever event caused the other two royal families to die off, and I'm assuming that's That's something that Andreas himself did. Andreas and his family, right? I think that was the calamity, and that it was associated with the music box because Andreas, the frog, either that frog child from the painting or their parent or something, and the toad were the original 3 stars. Because if you look at them, they're even colored after the 3 stones. Andreas, in this case, being heart, which might confirm that he really does believe that what he's doing is for the best, that his heart is just too big, so to speak. The toad being associated with wit being green, and the frog being pinkish associated with strength. Like, think about it. How much more sense would it make for the newts to be represented by, not really a newt. Andreas is a salamander, but newts are kinds of salamanders, so they're related in that way. But how much more sense would it make for the newts to be represented by a newt, the toads to be represented by a toad, and the frogs to be represented by a frog in a sort of council that controls the entire world, rather than just one king ruling over everything and apparently doing a pretty poor job. I don't know, I could be off base with a lot of this, but not to toot my own horn or anything, I have been pretty correct with basically everything else that I've speculated about this show up to this point. Like, I even think I'm correct about the different kinds of glowy magic just being an inherent part of this world. Because if these temples really are places where the magic of the box can be recharged, then it makes sense that the temples would be places where great amounts of that natural magic from the earth of Amphibia concentrate, right? And I think that that's something that we're going to see happen later on this season. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, isn't one of the temples supposed to be like a volcano-y location? A volcano, at least to me, sounds like a place where a lot of natural energy would be concentrated in a world where natural energy like this exists and translates to magic. So, I don't know. I feel pretty good about the various ideas put forth in this video, but as per usual, I'd like to know, what do you guys think of any of the theories that I suggested here? Do you have any theories about the show? Even if they contradict mine, I'd love to hear them. I'm eating up the lore in this show so hard right now. I'm loving it so much. So let's talk about it as much as we can. Down in the comment section, down below, or over my Discord. Link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.